Death of the universe.
We can of course discuss this.
Okay, welcome to STIR at IETF116. Appreciate everyone's being here during this session, and both in the room and across the globe. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to remind you about the note well. By this point in the week, you've probably looked at this a few times. This talks about your rights, your privileges, and your responsibilities. And please don't contribute till you know what those are. Please, next slide, treat everyone with respect and focus on the ideas that are being presented, not the people presenting them. So please, everybody use the Medico raise your hand technique to get in line. That way people here in the room and remotely have equal opportunities to do so or to participate. And please, if you're in the room, wear your mask except when you're at the microphone speaking.
Also, this session is being recorded, and also we have a live transcription going, as the chair has just discovered a few minutes ago, with a hot mic.
While talking about the
Slide. So we passed the agenda by the mail list earlier, so we're going to just now confirm that no one wants to bash the agenda that was previously discussed. Oh, I'm sorry. Wow. So right now we have one document with the RC editor. That's the identity header errors handling. We have a couple that are with the ISG where we're doing AD follow-up. We're going to hear about how those were sorted out in a few minutes. And what we're trying to decide today when we talk about service provider OOB is has the feedback we've gotten adequate, or is it ready to pass to the ISG? And we have some documents where we have no updates, but there's been recent list discussions, so make sure that those discussions continue. And then, like I said, we have an agenda that we had previously passed on the list. These are the things we're going to focus on.
It's 2 pages.
And there's 2 pages, exactly. The first half of the agenda is dealing with the documents that we have already passed on to the ISG, and the second half is the things that we're still working on.
Before we launch into our first topic, too, I would like to thank Simon Castle for taking notes for us.
Thank you, Simon.
Okay, so the first thing on the agenda, if there's no agenda bash, is what's going on with identity header error handling. Chris?
And there's no slides for this, right, Chris?
Right.
You should still come stand on the pink X.
Yes.
Turn it on.
Hello?
Yep.
Yeah, first for error handling, the only changes from 7 to 8 were very much editorial comments that I addressed. So I didn't create any slides. I think we hopefully should be all set.
Okay, so it's just done.
It's done.
Okay. Nice. Okay,
So now you're ready for RCD?
not ready for slides.
I'm ready for RCT. Yes. Yeah, so for RCD, hopefully we're crossing the finish line. We're basically resolving last comments. Roman had some very comprehensive, helpful comments. that I went through. Made a bunch of changes. I'll go through some of those details. And then one thing to discuss that was on the mailing list, there was a few comments that Ben brought up around URI support, whether we just do HTTPS or HTTPS and CID, or I guess the other option is just to keep it URIs in general. So that's the agenda. I did want to note in terms of addressing the comments, there was some normative language change. I did check though, the only one that added must or upgraded normative requirements is the first one, but I believe that actually pretty much implies what 8224 says and what we intended anyways, that it was clarifying that you should follow the display name as part of 3261. So I think that's a pretty okay normative change, but certainly would like to get especially feedback on that one. The other ones, I can hopefully quickly go through them. Yeah, what was this one? Changed. Oh yeah, URI to HTTPS, URI specifically for icons. I think in general, the intent was that they were HTTPS URIs to any remote content. Next one, JWT claim constraints section, added permitted values claim for the RCD claim may contain a single entry or optionally may contain multiple entries. So that was a slight change on the normative using may there. Right. Yeah, I assume we don't. It's not a problem. Again, the next one included I downgraded from a must to recommend for the CRN claim. Next one, there was pretty major rewrite, but I think the intent was kept the same for RCDI integrity verification. Next page. Yeah, this again used the not recommended term, but did not change the intent as far as I would say. The next one, level of assurance, I did remove and slightly changed. We basically removed the statement that you must represent the relationship of the third party signer. There was a comment about the example include just the entity themselves, and we did not talk about like relationships and other things like that. So I think we settled on basically keeping it simple, just that it's carrying indication of the identity of the generator of the passport. There was a note in the section that talks about using RCD and RCDI as additional claims to other passport extension types. And I just removed that note. And I think actually that was one that folks didn't like anyway. So I think it was safe to remove that note since it only was a note. Next page. Do I have a next page? Oh, okay.
So that last item, pretend I'm from the floor because I can't get out from back here.
Yeah.
That last item doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't
No.
change whether you can or cannot do that.
No, it was
Don't
sort
talk
of
about it.
more a note of like, you should really do integrity protection type of comments like that. It didn't change anything procedurally or anything like that.
John.
John Peterson. Yeah, because we're doing that, right? Yeah, that's the reason we're bringing this up.
Right.
So it's cool. No, there's nothing here that like precludes it or anything like that.
No, absolutely
Okay.
not.
Okay.
It was more like, a note to say it would be really good to do integrity. We really should enforce that type of things. So, and I know people didn't exactly like that language. So I think it's okay to remove the procedures, all that stuff, and and everything doesn't change. Okay, did I have another slide? I forget. Yes, I did. Added to recommended security section paragraphs. I think these are sort of straightforward. The second one adds a reference to some best practices in RFC 3986 as recommended by Roman. I think that's actually good there. The rest of it was very much being more complete about adding references to other documents and that type of thing. That's the bulk of the other changes and cleanups. So I think it ended up being, I think, a much better document. I'm happy we went through that. But yeah, that's the extent of the changes.
Ben Campbell pretending to be from the floor again. You mentioned my name on the one about the HTTP
Right.
CRO. Do you have a slide for that, or just?
I do not have, no, I don't have a
Okay.
slide for that.
So just for background, if people hadn't seen it, I guess it was Roman asked why we had that one allowed to be URI and not just HTTPS, and pointed out that if we're generally URI, then there are security considerations for every possible thing they might use, and that's kind of a problem. And I think you had proposed to taking it back to just HTTPS. And then I mentioned that one of the reasons we originally had that being more generic URI is we had in mind that someone might embed logos or other things
Right.
in the actual SIP request and refer to the body part using a CID URL.
Right.
Now, I realize if we were to allow that, then we probably need to say something about security considerations. And as the person who brought it up, I think I would be perfectly okay if we just said HTTPS for now. And if anyone decides they really need to do the other use case, they can update the document. But if there's anyone else who is actually planning to use a CID or something other than HTTPS to reference a logo or icon, then they should say something pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it actually came from a sort of inadvertent set of texts that referred to URIs for HTTPS URIs to images, just, inadvertently thinking that's the only place we would ever get them. I think from what I've heard from other industry folks, that's generally, you will use CDNs and other things to deliver images. That only makes sense. It probably would be a very limited use case that would use CID. So I think we're safe there, but
Yeah, probably. I'm sorry, John Peterson once again. And the transcription can't make out what I'm saying when I'm wearing a mask, I've noticed. And so we'll see if it's any better when I'm talking normally. Yeah, I mean, I would be concerned as well about more opportunities for like malicious content when it comes down to either CIDs or data URLs. Data URLs would be the other, I think, prime suspect for things people would try to jam into this.
Right.
And like, I mean, the issue is just then it's completely on that originator and without any JWT constraint that actually prevented that. And think about the JWT constraint part of that too, right? And what that would imply if you were to place those restrictions, if people were using things like, like data URLs. So in general, yeah, I mean, the data collection things mentioned in the first paragraph there, they are, not insubstantial, but I'd be happy for this initial cut, just having it be HTTPS.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was one other thing I wanted to mention too. I updated the SIPCOR document that corresponds to this for call info, and that is referenced by this. I will be following up on the SIPCOR list to hopefully push that through. It was in a state where I decided not to change it because we were changing too many things in the RCD document, and it was a pain to keep up with that. So I waited till the end, and then I think it's pretty straightforward. So be on the lookout for that.
You know, it's funny, I forgot to take my hand down, but of course, here I am once again. But from an ISG progression perspective, so is that document is not in front of the ISG yet?
Yes, it is.
No.
Okay.
How is it?
I mean, I presume that they have a dependency
SIPCOR.
for publication. In other words, they would need to advance together to, like, the RC editor will be holding it until we see the, okay. Just making sure that we were tracking that.
Yeah. Well, then I guess I need to move on that one. Yeah.
Is that it?
That's it.
So we were discussing among the chairs that there are some normative changes here. As far as we can tell, they're really clarifications more than change of intent, but it does change normative language. So we propose that we take a few days and have a call for objections to see if anyone objects to any of the normative language changes. Silence means consent. And I think our gating factor is how fast the Roman and other area directors that are holding discusses. Are there any others or just Roman?
I think it's just Roman, but
Okay.
I couldn't swear on it.
The odds are very much that we would get through any call for objections before the ISG gets ready to progress anyway.
Mhm.
So do we need a time limit on that or just say, do it now if you object?
I'll send it in a minute.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Are you done? Hang on.
He is done.
Okay. Oh, it's Robert next. We don't have slides for him. Isn't Robert next?
Yep. No, without.
This is also shy at least one ballot position, so I have to scare that up somehow as well. Just so you know, it's not as simple as clearing with Roman. I'll figure that part out though.
Okay.
Get out your switch. Get out your switch. Yeah.
We got to the plenary, right?
Oh, yeah. Otherwise, you'll have to be getting more ballot positions. Ready?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, I'm Robert Sparks. Just take a few moments. We were reminded that we had discussed what to do with an errata that had been filed against one of our RFCs, where we had conflicting information in the document about whether or not the value to the PPT parameter was quoted or not. And you'll find in our meeting recordings and the minutes that were associated with that meeting, I don't remember the meeting number off the top of my head, a fairly concise description of what we thought we should end up doing about it. But then it fell on the floor for is any action for actually dispatching the errata, to do something with the errata, to figure out what to do with the document. So I wanted to talk with the group for a few minutes today to find out what we think we should do. My proposal is that we capture the notes of the discussion that were already summarized in that set of meeting minutes as notes in the errata, then ask the AD to mark the errata hold for document update. That way it'll be there anytime when we come back for the affected RFC, then we can make sure that it gets captured at that time. I don't think that getting a correction published in the RC base in a more timely fashion than that is necessary. This has, been a point of concern, a minor point of interoperability at the time that the errata was reported, but it's not causing ongoing problems in real deployments. Does anybody have any concerns with the dispatching of this that I just proposed, or suggest that we do anything different? I see a whole sea of don't care. So that's what I'm going to go do.
The notes you said you want to capture are the notes from the previous meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how I took it.
Mhm. Okay, so, oh, now we need slides.
Thank you.
Passport, messaging. John, you're up.
Good afternoon. All right, STIR for messaging, so exciting. We actually got this one out of the working group. It went to the ISG. That's usually what we're trying to accomplish here. But for those who have not been following this work with all of the rigor and attention that me and the chairs and Chris and a few other people do, this is basically a draft about leveraging the work we've done on STIR for text and multimedia instant messages. Why we want to do that? Well, I understand message spam is becoming increasingly a problem, in part caused by us, by the fact that it's becoming harder to spoof and create spam with the telephone network, with ordinary calls. And so we're seeing increases in this that are going in exactly the opposite direction from the decreases we've been getting in actual call spam. And, you know, like message spam, it's a problem. It's not the biggest problem in the world, in part because there are some reasonable mitigation strategies for it, like just analytics, Bayesian analysis, right, of text content as it goes through service bureaus. That's very common in the US. Of course, the problem is there's a bit of a sea change happening in messaging these days, especially messaging that comes from telephones, and that is end-to-end encryption. And encrypted messaging creates, well, a problem for all of that Bayesian analysis. And like there've been a bunch of ideas floated around this, and you know, having anything that is governed by telephone numbers in the mix, I just think it would be a waste of time to develop some PKI or some other credentialing system that is going to be applicable to telephone numbers when we have a perfectly good one that is being deployed in like lots of nation states around the world now that we could leverage for this. So yeah, that's what this does. Next slide, please. So it's currently on the ISG ballot. We got some discusses still. I put in a lot of fixes after the 07 following the ISG review. Certainly Roman and others had some pretty good catches in there, including places I had like totally flubbed RFC numbers and embarrassing things like that are now rectified. But based on a discussion I did not attend yesterday, that I will, I guess, give what précis I have learned from talking to two witnesses. So two witnesses, eyewitnesses to this event who were present, have given me the information that I'll be giving you now. There's really two big things we need to fix in 08. So there will be a 08 of this shortly. One is to use this COSI registry in order to describe the algorithms that we're using to create hashes for this new message I claim element that we put in. And this will just enable us to better manage algorithm agility on the off chance we need to swap things out later. This is totally fine. There was another proposal, maybe we should create our own registry and use that here, and why would I bother to do that? There's plenty of great stuff out there. And the second thing is that we're going to add some new language to the introduction that basically is going to clarify that there is indeed some normative guidance in this draft, a smidgen, enough I would say that it would be possible if we wanted to take this from PS to, you know, actually like a full standard someday, one could test two implementations and make sure they are interoperable based on that normative language. There's not much, but it's there. But we just want to clarify there's normative stuff, and then there's also informative guidance. And the reason why there's a ton of informative guidance in this document is because, as with all of the specifications we produce here, there are in fact other standards bodies that take these and go do things with them. And they have their own profiles and their own use cases and everything else like that. And so we kind of want to sketch what we think that space is, that some national standards body or international group, not to point fingers at anyone in particular, might want to utilize this for without placing too many constraints on what they get to do. And I think once those are handled, we should be done. Is there a third eyewitness to this conversation that would like to corroborate that my understanding of what we need to do is correct.
Murray was there.
Murray, sorry, I wasn't listening. Yes. Yeah. So that's what I'm going to do to fix this. Basically those two things. There was another matter actually that was just brought up right before the meeting by my friend Jonathan.
So this is Ben. I'm actually in queue before you leave this one.
Oh, okay. Why don't you stay on this?
I'm actually not commenting on this. I'm commenting on RCD. I should have said it there. Does the RCDI need to reference the same COSI registry, the hash for RCDI and the RCD RFC?
Well, thank you so much for raising that, Ben. So certainly we could, and to be clear, the message I syntax and description was just forklifted entirely out of how we described RCDI, right? So in the interest of consistency across the STIR standards, probably should. Sounds like kind of a hassle though, but fortunately, Chris would be writing that, and so you can now.
I was
how
just
about
going to
this?
say I was going to copy and paste from
Yes,
you, but-
exactly. I'll write the stuff for this, then we'll be even. It will have been a reciprocal trade, potlatch, as we say. Anything else from you, Ben?
You don't have a slide for the thing Jonathan just talked about.
I don't, because he just talked about it. I did not have the time to write a slide on my iPad before I got up here to discuss the thing Jonathan just talked about. But Jonathan also suggested, and there were some intimations of this in the ISG review that I kind of was like, I don't know. Maybe being a bit more prescriptive about how to create the MIME bodies for message I. Just for cases where natively messages were not already encoded in MIME, and there isn't like a standard transformation one would use to get those into MIME, maybe we could say just a couple words. And again, I don't want to be too prescriptive because there's like a bunch of things out there that behave in a bunch of different ways. And I know that there is SMPP to MIME stuff because of the email to SMS gateways that exist and things like that. And so I think a lot of these, the transformation is well known and it's deterministic. We could add some language like, well, if all you really have is like the text string or whatever, wrap it in MIME like this. I don't know, this is going to add like, it's going to change anybody's world or make this like so much easier to do, but I could certainly put in a couple sentences about that if people think it is worth it. So anybody think it is not worth it for me to write a couple sentences about that?
Chris and Jonathan are in queue.
I think it's worth writing, but I have a different comment. But it is on this. Okay, good. Yeah.
Another interesting use case for this, which again doesn't change the text you'd put in here, is
Since we're out of order in the queue, this is
I'm sorry.
Jonathan Rosenberg.
this is Jonathan Rosenberg from 5.9. Thank you. The one who suggested the content we're discussing. Another interesting use case is Mimi. Wrap your head around that. And you can only do that if, in fact, there was something in this document that said how to start without MIME content. So,
And there have been some preliminary discussions incidentally about how MLS and STIR might interact around this as well. And there will be a draft about that, I'm sure, someday when myself and Richard Barnes, I don't know, find an iota of time that we can use to do anything. Chris, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on the COSE registry because I didn't mention it to you that, and maybe this is obvious, but you should have some text that it says only the hash algorithms.
Right. Yeah, we don't mean
Yeah,
all the algorithms
right.
that are in COSI. I mean,
So
I
just
think,
wanted to mention that.
yeah, we're really just stealing their tokens, I think, to be blunt. Like we almost don't even care what the semantics are behind the token. This is just a place where if you need tokens that are going to be that prefix that we're going to stick in there, we're saying those are syntactically like what you would find in the COSI registry. And that also, the other advantage to actually point to that is that COSI already has some stuff built in that explains like the perceived weakness or strength of these algorithms, which we allude to in a totally hand-wavy way today, right? And it would be better to have something that a bunch of security people that have looked at this and been like, these are good algorithms, these are bad algorithms. So we're not just saying SHA-1 is bad. Yes, everybody knows that SHA-1 is bad. But other than that, I think we're pretty close and that this should be able to go forward. We should be cool. Unless anyone thinks otherwise.
Jonathan, is that a stale queue for you?
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
With that, I believe we have included our discussion of the messaging draft. What is next? I have a feeling I'm not going anywhere. So we'll see.
You get that feeling?
Yes.
Connected identity.
Connected identity. Okay, so next slide, just keep it coming. Because I will explain what connected identity is briefly. Again, I always put in the slide, and I like recycle these all the time, right? That just explains what it is we work on here for people that are here for the first time. So what is connected identity? Way back at the dawn of time, before there was STIR, back in the dark days of a protocol we designed that did not work, called RFC 4474. A guy by the name of John Elwell wrote a very helpful document called RFC 4916 that answered a fundamental question about STIR that we did not, or about 4474, we did not really think about much at the time, which is how do you make it work in the backwards direction? And part of the issue around all this is that, we can sign, today when we think about STIR, we think it only signs invites, right? It's like unidirectional. Nobody cares about any other requests being signed with STIR. But in actuality, if you did want to figure out who the party was on the other side of the call, who the callee was in a secure way, you needed some way to attach a passport for a message that doesn't come in the backwards direction. The problem with that is, of course, if there is any retargeting that happened, anything that changed who it was you were trying to reach, that party would not have a credential that would be able to answer to what the original to was in the request. And there's some other historical stuff I wouldn't bore people with about how you do transaction and dialogue matching and things like that go back to RFC 2543 that we remedied in 3261, but nobody really listened to closely enough. So this required a lot of work in this really complicated new option tag that John Elwell created that was called from change. So why have I gotten interested in this? Well, if you look at this second set of bullets up here, there are a set of security vulnerabilities that are adjacent to STIR, not certainly in the original STIR threat model, but people have started thinking about in connection with the protections that STIR provides. And a good example of this is just a forged by in a request, right? If you wanted to do a denial of service and tear down a request, wouldn't it be great if there could be a passport attached to a by request so that you could know, oh, this in fact was not made by the person that I tried to reach and so on, right? And there are more sophisticated versions of this, of route hijacking, of call stretching, which is a type of toll fraud that occurs a lot in international mobile that I've gotten really interested in. And so we actually fixed the charter to put it into a space where we could do this. And, I'd spent a ton of time, next slide, trying to figure out, okay, how do we get this like from change thing to work? But at the previous IETF, I decided to just blow all that up and not bother dealing with from change anymore at all. And I proposed a new passport type, and that passport type is RSP. It only appears in SIP responses. So now a passport can be carried in provisional responses in a 180 or a 183, which is good for early media cases, as well as a 200 OK. And I just said, hey, the reason why I think this works is because the way that we have seen STIR and, well, overall SIP these days deployed, with all the SBCs and things like it in the world, I'm not that concerned about the routing issues around all this. And it seems likely that any way that you send requests, responses will come back through effectively the same entities. And so I designed it to basically behave the same way that Div did. And it'll work really, really well in a sunny day case. So if what you're concerned about, for example, is a route hijacking attack, where I am trying to send a request like to my bank to start a conversation with my banker, I will get a positive affirmation that, yes, you reached Bank of America in the backwards direction that comes to me. I can validate it. I can be sure that this is a secure channel. So this is looking at a bunch of use cases like that, banking, healthcare, education. There's a set of things where there are certain risks that we want to make sure that we get right. And we also want to make sure that we can leverage this for securing media keys as well, which is something we built into STIR from the start. This notion you could have the M key, the media key parameter that contains a key fingerprint, but it needs to be bidirectional for this to work. And for a messaging case like MSRP, were we to do MSRP over TLS, perfect example of a case where you really want to have that assurance from both sides that, yes, this is the proper media stream. That's why we built this thing up. And so last time, next slide, we agreed to just nuke the from change stuff, so I did. It's out. It's now punted to future work. If somebody wants to go back through someday in the future and figure out a way to make that incredibly complicated, you've got pracs and updates and like all this stuff going on, like as mid-dialogue requests, it's very chatty. A lot of stuff that is not, I would say, commonly utilized in operational SIP networks today. Someone is welcome to do that. I did some other miscellaneous cleanup to it. I added some seccons, just kind of did some once over here and there and caught a few bugs that hadn't been removed previously. But otherwise, next slide, I think it's starting to look pretty good. Oh, Ecker, you're in queue. Okay, because I'm about to wrap. So yeah, I mean, I will say this, it's not really so much of an update to that original RFC 4916 anymore. We could really say it obsoletes now. But since someday somebody might want to fix that from change, let's not say that. But I'm not going to change the name of the idea. Put this one. Let's just like advance it and be done. But I think probably we could go to working group last call on this at the same time as I eliminate the last bits of cruft that are still left over in there. And that is my proposal. I would like any comments on that or anyone who objects to it. But I would also like to hear from my very dear friend, Mr. Squirlum.
I don't object to this. It seems like better than nothing. I guess what I'm a little curious about though is, so like, what is the expectation around how the caller behaves in the absence of this or the incorrectness of this? Because that's always been a challenge, in any kind of incremental deployment scenario. Do we have some thoughts about that?
There's a little bit of language in there today that suggests, again, we don't want to prescribe the UX of this, but that, for example, there could be some criticality indicator that the caller could put on a call. If I know I'm calling Fidelity Investments, I want to make sure I actually reach them. I set this criticality thing attached to that.
Yeah.
And if I don't reach Fidelity, don't set up the call.
Yeah. Is there some, have you given, and I think the answer is probably not for this, but have you given any thought to trying to condition the caller's expectations in a more useful way? I mean, I can make some hand waving, but I'm just curious what you thought.
Yeah, there's some real sci-fi language in there, actually, I think that I've not cut yet, that suggests things like doing medialess dialogues, where if I am even like clicking a link on the web to Fidelity's number, there's that modal dialogue you get that's like, do you really want to call this? You could actually set up the dialogue then and learn from Fidelity whether or not it supports this. That could even affect what the modal dialogue looks like without really setting up a call yet.
Yeah.
There's like operational systems like that you could build that, or you could build like an enum-like system that's actually, that'll demarc-like, that'll go ahead and say, it turns out I know Fidelity supports this, and if you do this and it doesn't look like they supported it, the criticality should
Is there some
fail.
version where you decorate the URL?
We have.
Or is it just everybody puts the spare phone number in and trust that the device is there as a phone number?
We could talk about, I mean, again, what property from decoration do you think you get?
Well, they would say you ought to expect to receive this, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess I guess the problem is that the problem is your local system, not that remote system. Like Fidelity knows it like sends RSP, but like maybe your local system doesn't do it properly.
I mean, we could always use, SIP has required supported option tag. And so that's what from change was. It was like another option tag, right? So we could put in an option tag for it that, again, would be the result of you setting, what would happen when you set that criticality was it would mean I am requiring that this option exists in order for this to go forward.
I mean, I didn't think this seems like a good start. I'm just trying to think forward, like, because one of the big problems I always had with, with systems, unlike the web, where the web kind of says like has to be HTTPS, where like, okay, so what? I just don't get it, and then what, right? But I think this is a prerequisite to anything, any kind of sort of tagging or padding along those lines. So.
Chris Wynn, I think that's actually a really good point, but I think we can punt it to just be a SIP application that, handles the response and, maybe specify something in the future. But
yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of stuff in there as well that just says, look, these provisional responses I'm talking about, Ecker, they're not even reliable. Like they can be dropped for like any number of reasons and not actually come back and reach the UIC that originated the transaction, right? And so I'm just like, look, it doesn't work. Doesn't work. Like, so it's kind of best effort. And the only thing that I think really can mitigate that or create the proper experience is if there is some, again, a criticality button you can push that says, for this kind of call, it is really important to me that this work. And if it doesn't, I don't want the call to be set up. But that's entirely UX. There's like no bit on the wire that I think would have anything like the efficacy that that has, because that's actually the expression of the user preference or criticality in this case. That's my assess anyway. I'm very open to better ideas for this, but I think what's there is baked enough that I'd like to have some eyes on it and maybe advance this document.
So you
to the next stage
mentioned
of its life.
a little bit of decorrupting. Do you want to do that before or after work group last call?
Like I think I have like, I'm talking about, I have a change log from RFC 4916 that at this point I should probably just delete, right? It's that kind of decorrupting.
So after.
Yeah, so after is what I'm saying.
So the question I believe on the floor is, does anyone think this is not ready for a working group last call?
Everybody who's read this, everyone loves this. It's a page turner, this one, you know, of all of the IDs that I've worked on, I really feel like that the narrative, it just really grabs you. And start on this. You get invested in the characters. Yeah. Alice and Bob, and you know, will they ever really get together? Will they ever really be able to talk and know each other truly, authenticate each other?
It was never Bob.
It was never Bob. It's always.
Charlie has captured the call.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so in the notes, please capture that the chairs will do a working group last call as soon as we get home, and if not sooner, and that we will do a better job of getting around to that than we did last time. We promised working
With
group last call.
the service provider band document, yes. Okay, great. Thank you. I'll be stepping down now, and I believe John Peterson is going to come up.
Oh, good to see you, John.
I missed you guys.
So that was out of bounds service provider. No, that's what we're doing next, right?
I don't know. I don't read the agenda.
That's what we're doing now.
That's what we're doing now. Okay, next slide. Service provider OOB. So way back in the dawn of time, Eric Riscorla and myself sat in an office in, I believe it was at Mozilla, wasn't it? Yeah, down in, would that be Santa Clara? Where?
That was Mountain View.
Mountain View. And we sketched out on a whiteboard a plan for how, if you're not using SIP for the entire end-to-end transaction of a call, what are you going to do? How are we going to make this work? Because unfortunately, to the chagrin of people like Jonathan and myself, SIP is not universally deployed end-to-end everywhere in the universe. We're only like 20, 25 years into this. And, you know, someday, maybe before we die, everything will be SIP or be replaced by something better than SIP. But, you know, so we started developing a fallback plan. The original version of this draft was called fallback. That defines something called a call placement service. And a call placement service is somewhere you can stick a passport, and any service that would like to rely on STIR can consult a call placement service in order to be able to recover a passport on the off chance that just somewhere in the transit of the call, it gets discarded. It started as a lovely SIP invite. It hit a PSTN gateway. All that got cut. Even a yard of PSTN in the middle, right, would be enough. Or a policy at an SVC that's just like, I'm stripping all those identity headers. Sorry, could make this not work. So our notion was to have a fallback, and that's what the CPS is. Now, our original assumptions in that treated the CPS as an untrusted third-party service. Eric did a lot of really brilliant work that is up over my head that he would have to explain himself here to demonstrate ways that you could kind of blind any third-party service to privacy impacted information that it could learn in this instance. And so what we've done in the service provider OOB draft is look at an alternative use case for this, where really it's the service providers itself that are operating these CPSs, or maybe some vendors like operating it under contract to them on their behalf. But in other words, entities that see the calling and called party number anyway, because they receive the call signaling, right? So there's no revelation of anything to them that they don't already know. And in that instance, I think we can have some different assumptions about the security. And I will say this is descriptive of emerging deployments of STIR. I'd say it's a little bit more than emerging at this point. And so this is not a science project. This is something that is aiming for PS. And I can say that my company does a lot of these today. Next slide. So yeah, we had a working group last call for this. There weren't a ton of comments, but our note taker, thank you, Simon, sent actually some very useful comments after the IETF meeting in London, most of which focused on the concept in the draft that is called the CPS advertisement. And the idea behind this is in a system where you aren't pre-provisioned to understand, okay, this is how I find the CPS that I'm going to send passports to for a terminating service provider. Is there some way I could discover it? And so we created this concept in the draft of a CPS advertisement, which is basically a JSON document that is signed with a STIR credential saying, hey, for my service provider code or whatever, here's the URL of my CPS. And those advertisements could be shared through a variety of different things. We didn't really want to be prescriptive about that. We just wanted to make sure there was a secure way that leveraged the PKI that STIR already created, that you could then bind your particular implementation to, from the SPC that's in your certificate, you have a document signing thing saying, for this SPC, go to this URL. And Simon had a bunch of comments about, well, we should probably be clear if you're using SPCs, and yet the calling party has no way to convert a called telephone number into what the SPC should be. That's probably a problem. And so that's now kind of noted as a defect of this. I think in a lot of places you can, anywhere that we have like an MPAC, as we do in the United States. And we run this service for the GSMA that's called Pathfinder that does all the MMS routing. So from number portability, like all around the world, it effectively does exactly this. So services that can do this internationally exist, and we're pretty familiar with them, and it's not a terrible stretch to have something like that. But we want to say if we don't have that, okay, then yeah, you probably shouldn't advertise SPCs. We also put in a disambiguation prefix, because really if you look at the contents of the TNOP list in a cert, and here I would defer to Mr. Housley, who helped us out a great deal with getting that syntax correct. This is kind of like a bucket of these things, right, that appear there. And they use something called a TN entry value to differentiate whether they represent an SPC, a single telephone number, or a telephone number range. And so my proposal was, well, okay, we've already got codes that represent that. Let's just steal those and stick them in front of this thing and say we're done. I haven't asked you what you think about this yet, Ross. Does that seem sufficient to you?
Yeah, I seems okay.
Ross says it seems okay. That was a ringing endorsement of tremendous certainty that we're going to use the foundation for our work going forward. So Simon also suggested, what if you actually wanted to use non-8226, non-STIR credentials for this to advertise things like URLs? And I said, I don't think I want to specify that now. Let's keep this to STIR credentials, but at least put in a little sentence of future proofing for that. And so I believe, and Simon, I know you're listening because you're taking detailed notes on all this. If you think that's cool, you think we got this nailed, and please do feel free to stop taking notes and talk to us for a moment if you'd like. That was the only comment I really had attached to the working group last call. And so I would say we have addressed such comments. Simon, good to hear from you, man. How are you?
Hi there, I'm good, thanks. Yes, I think those addressed all the comments I had, so I'm happy with the updates there.
Fantastic. Look at that. We're batting 1,000 here. Everybody is just happy with what's in this draft. Happy enough that I think this should become Murray's problem. And Murray, I do note at the bottom of that, there is a down ref in here that will need to be in IETF-LC. Ben.
So as I'm quite sure you're aware, Addis has done a document that's very much based on the concepts in here. They don't directly reference it. And there has been some controversy there about issues around a potential substitution attack and also around potential privacy issues. And I was going to bring that up mainly to mention that I don't think those apply to this draft. They apply to the version that they did.
I agree with you.
And but yeah, I wanted to make sure that it's on the table that people know about that. But they made some architectural assumptions that changed the security considerations some.
Oh,
and I'm not taking a side one way or the other if it's a problem, because I know that's a really hot conversation over there. But
And
Just-
I think with good reason. As far as I don't participate in ATIS personally, but little birdies tell me things about this. Yeah, certainly if you take the concept of the CPS and decouple it from the service providers that way, and instead, and I'm saying this mostly for Ecker's benefit so we can appreciate what the design is over there, everyone who operates a CPS is required to flood and share every passport they see with everybody else who operates a CPS. Suddenly things like substitution attacks become...
Ecker gave it a thumbs up for the record. I believe Ecker was joking also for the record.
So yeah, I don't believe that's salient to this. Yes. I think we're done. Is there next slide for this? I don't think so. Usually when I have next steps, that means I'm not going to say anything more about this document.
So
Next slide.
your last question is time to ship.
Time to ship.
Does
Yeah, what do people think?
Does anyone think it's not time to ship?
Been around a little bit. Are you in queue?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Flee while you can. It only gets worse from here. I'll be right behind you.
Okay.
Okay. Am I done yet? Do I have another one?
I'm sure, yeah, OSPSP.
All right, I'm gonna get my water before this. This is actually a discussion.
For CSP, I can't do it. Well,
It's not, I wish this was just OCSP. First of all, unlike our previous discussions, you'll see there's kind of a list of documents up there. That's usually not a good sign. That means that there's a lot going on and probably there's some dispute about whether we should do one thing or another thing. This is always our favorite, right? And that etc. there, I will make clear the meaning of that momentarily. So next slide. Freshness. Everybody wants freshness for certificates. Everyone wants to make sure that they know such a time as you're a verification service, you've got a passport, you're going to look up the X5U that you found in the header of the passport. You want to make sure the cert that you get out of that is fresh. And like freshness for STIR certs is a little bit different than it is for regular PKI certs. Why is that? It's because we extended the X509 cert for STIR with something called a TN auth list, which is where that SPC field, that service provider code I was talking about, exists. We don't have a lot of concern about freshness for SPCs. They tend to be very, very long-lived. In fact, some of these were issued in like the 80s and are still the same for these particular operators that use them in the operating company numbers in the United States where we deploy this. But for telephone numbers, when you have telephone numbers or telephone number ranges that are baked into these certificates, something gets a little dodgier because of things like number portability or just people that have number inventories that are for whatever reason dynamic. Very large enterprises that may change number ranges and all that stuff. So if you baked a cert, how do you know if you're a verification service at the time you're looking at this cert, okay, is this telephone number still in the scope of authority of the cert that signed this passport? This is a little tricky. And so we looked at a couple of approaches here, and the two high-level ones that we've gravitated towards are using the Online Certificate Status Protocol, OCSP, or using short-lived certs. And there are a lot of subvariants here. Next slide. So Simon Castle's colleague, Jack Rickard. Jack, are you actually on? Is he in the thing today? Simon may know if he's there or not. He wrote a great summary that went out on the list since London.
I don't see him.
About kind of what the options are that are in play for this. Now, back in RFC 8226, we already created provision where we could use the AIA extension within STIR certificates to get the list of telephone numbers that a particular certificate is responsible for, that it has its scope of authority by reference. It's basically a URL, you go look at that, and you just make sure whoever manages that URL, or the resource behind it, dynamically updates it and always knows. I mean, so you have to trust this person, and maybe it's your CA or it's your national numbering authority or whomever watches over that and makes sure that's always accurate. The problem with that, of course, is if you have a very large number list or complicated ones, you're revealing a lot of information about all the numbers that this particular enterprise has every time somebody hits that. You can't really cache it because, again, it could change at like any moment. And so you're constantly downloading this like massive list. If this enterprise has like, or like Jonathan, like your use case, like how many telephone numbers, does a call center provider, a CPaaS provider actually like manage at any given time? So we're like, okay, can we do better? So we looked at a couple of options. The first was OCSP without stapling. That is documented in our working group item around this. And the basic idea of this is let's use OCSP. OCSP is commonly used for certs. Every single STIR certificate that my company has ever issued has OCSP in it. What we did though is we added like this little extension to it. And this extension allows you to just ask about a single telephone number. We thought this had a very valuable kind of, not privacy, but corporate data minimization, we'll say, property to it. That, you use this extension just to say, hey, the calling party number I got for this call as a verification service, is that in scope of this certificate at this very moment, yes or no? That's the only information you get back. And we thought that, and Decker, if you have better thoughts, I'd love to hear, was the best way to like do data minimization for this. But a lot of people pointed out, well, that reveals ultimately to whoever is running that OCSP service, probably your CA, who it is that is receiving these calls and for what number. And that data leakage is something that people wanted to avoid. So why can't we just do stapling? So we started looking at stapling, and I have a slide about stapling in a minute, but I'm just articulating what the options are here now. So then there's a whole other category of options, which is to use short-lived certificates. And the idea behind short-lived certificates is even on a per call basis, an authentication service talking to a CA could just make a cert, right, that is for a single TN, use it to sign just for the calling party number of this particular call, and then put that in the X5U parameter of the header of the passport. And so relying parties, the verification services, when they acquire that certificate, can say, oh, great, this is valid at this second. We have that on the CA's authority, and done, right? We data minimized to the same degree that the OCSP stapling, the OCSP extension is that we described. The issue, of course, is, well, these things are not usefully cacheable, and like it may be a bit of a hassle for authentication services to like get these dynamically generated certificates. So there's a bunch of different ways to skin that cat, right? Where you can maybe have a cert that's bigger than just one number, or that lasts longer than the next 5 minutes. Like there's optimizations you can do that may make it a little better in terms of the cacheability of those. But this is something I worked on for a bit, and there wasn't a ton of interest in it previously. So I have like an expired ID about it that you can go read that's listed up there. But Jack's summary included a new thought, which was, well, can we do like the same thing as short-lived, but basically with stapling, so you don't have to go acquire the cert through the X5U. What do we mean by stapling in this case? Well, probably sending the leaf, right? And then an X5C that shows you like the cert chain for the leaf with it, so that hopefully the relying party in this instance doesn't have to like dip the CA, which has the same properties as OCSP without stapling. So those are the things that are on the menu in this discussion right now, and we're having a lot of trouble with this. So Eric Rescorla is going to come up and solve all our problems right now.
Well, I don't like me, but at least I'll try to like see if we can piece through this problem a little bit.
Sure.
I mean, so like the very highest level, it seems like there really are two possibilities. One is that you can send something which is self-contained and has a short lifespan that contains all the information you need. Mm-hmm. And the other is you can send it to not contain all the information you need, and someone can have to go query it, right?
Yep.
And as I understand the situation, basically the way to reason about the reason about this is that the long-lived certificate has got the entire possible range of valid TNs, and then over time it starts to accumulate gaps, right?
Except for the by ref option, which is
right. Right. The by ref option, right. And so right. And so right. But I mean, I guess so the but right. So
but that has the revelation problem. That you're sending the entire list of all the TNs at this particular enterprise or whatever control.
Right. Well, I mean, so what is the conventional practice? Is the conventional practice now with the OCSP that you advertise a range that actually contains numbers you never owned, and and then when people live check, like they can basically consolidate multiple ranges, including spaces you don't own, and then people live check in the CD own this, and you say, no, actually I don't.
I mean, yeah. So the practice, and again, that has not been implemented that I'm aware of. Like we put we put regular OCSP, right, without this extension. But the way this extension would work is, again, we just added this number you're asking about extension to the OCSP query, and so when it comes back, you just get a binary pass-fail.
Okay, but I guess if you do regular OCSP, doesn't why doesn't that have the same revelation problem as the AIA?
Oh, so I mean, if you're saying that you could just pull it endlessly and like look at the numbering space, of course. Yes.
Well, no, but I guess, sorry, maybe I'm just missing something. So the certificate has a TN range in it, right? Mm. And the AIA extension basically is an oracle. It says, please give me actually the valid numbers in this range, right? Mm-hmm. And
so we wouldn't bake all the numbers. I'm sorry, no, we don't bake the numbers into the cert anymore. We're doing
at all. It's got nothing in it at all. It's got I got a key and nothing else. Right?
Yes. So the AIA just replaces the TN auth list that would have been baked into the cert by the CA.
Okay.
And I think the question is this number authorized?
Yeah, because that's the only thing you care about as the verification service. There's only one calling number.
Yeah.
Right, for any given call. And so the verification service just we need a way to do this where we reveal as little as possible, where you can validate that the signer of this passport actually controls only that number. That's our design goal.
Yeah. I mean, this is what you and I were talking about like right before the session, right? So there's like cryptography for doing this. It's just expensive. So the question is like, PIR, right? So the question is there some version that's to be less expensive? Maybe even I can chat offline and you give me a sense of the size of the space.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine some ideas like that might make it work. It would work a lot better, frankly, if the certificates only can cover relatively small ranges. Because asking the question, there are 1,000 valid numbers. Asking is this number like allowed is an easier question than asking is there like all possible numbers?
Yeah. Well, again, so you're always only asking about one number.
No, I understand. Right.
It's just, so it would be hard to put an upper bound on the number of numbers that could be in the range that the cert has responsibility for, right?
Well, I mean,
that's the challenge.
Well, again, I'm trying to riffing here, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, like one possible design, one possible design one might imagine would be say that like the certificates cover blocks of 100, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can query the thing, and then you could say like, is this number in this 100? Do you have it or not, right? Mm-hmm. And for various technical reasons, it might be possible to get an answer to that efficiently. Mm-hmm. And even with the AA version, you have to like repeatedly call in to pull it, right? So, but I think there's no way around the polling problem fundamentally, right? Because there's not that many numbers, right?
Unless stapling can actually suffice. Yeah, and stapling, and we'll talk about what stapling is in a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, but you get the idea. You just ship the leaf cert, right? In a parameter in the passport itself, and then use an X5C to point to like everything else you would need for that.
Yeah. Again, if you're willing to call the CA every time you want to do that, right?
Well, we could push the entire chain ultimately, right? It's just the passport will be huge then.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the trade-off, right?
There's two guys waiting.
Okay, yes. Others in queue, please.
I don't want to, skip ahead to your conclusion or anything like that, but I think in general, like, in my mind, number ranges don't make sense in this discussion anymore. But
so you think it should all be single TN instruments at this point, whether they're short-lived or the OCSP thing?
I really think so.
I mean, it is the part that does our data minimization responsibility best if we do that. There's no question about it. Unless Ecker has some messed up crypto thing where like we can ship a block of stuff and some hash or something makes it so we can't reveal what the numbers are. But if we have like one number, you tell me, Ecker. We can talk about this offline. I'm sure it's more complicated. Yeah. I think we're less concerned about paying costs on the relying party side than we are about the dip, about the latency. Like, I think we'll take that trade like any day in the system. Okay. Yeah, Jonathan, sorry.
Jonathan Rosenberg. So one thought, I don't know if it helps because I'm not 100% following this. back in the Viper days, we had a similar problem of revealing information to the cloud based on what calls were being received. And the solution there was a sort of simple, not pure information free solution that Ek was just talking about, but you query for multiple numbers, not just the one that you received.
Yeah. Put in bogeys. I think we're less concerned about the revelation of who the relying party is to the CA than we are about the amount that the relying parties learn about the assets of like the enterprise or whoever it is that like owns all these numbers.
Okay.
So it's more about, can I spider and figure out what every 59 number is like by accessing this? So that's the main minimization thing we're trying to avoid, but totally agreed that we could use bogus queries. We do this with the CPS, right? This is one of the mitigations we have,
exactly,
so that you can't actually trace the call path through that.
So it's almost it's a malicious provider attack. Is what you're worried about? Like
No,
I'm a valid telco.
OCSP is open. Like anybody can send an OCSP tip saying like,
it's
hey,
open?
Pretty much.
Oh, well, that's your problem.
Well, yeah. So we could help with that, but
I mean that is exactly it. I mean, in reality, isn't anyone in the world that needs to access this thing. It's like the set of providers who sign up for this service, and seems like an unlikely attack.
So, I mean, I could imagine a scenario, because again, I think very internationally these days and about calls crossing borders, and sure, there's a set of trusted entities maybe in one nation state, but are they, should the call still be, should relying parties who are not part of the Mark Watson trust network from RC 3324, if you remember that, right? Should they still be able to be relying parties in this? The answer is no. I don't know.
Okay.
I want
in practice,
this to work.
Is it not true?
Well, so in practice, like in North America, there are a list of trusted CAs, right, and effectively a list of verification services that have some tie to the PA, right, in a shaken model that effectively it does provide that property. It is a closed network. It's just, I have noticed that you can't always predict where telephone calls are going to land based on what the original calling party number is. It would be great that wherever it lands, even if it's not necessarily in your trust network, like that could still show up, but maybe that's a property we should discard. Okay. It's a valid comment.
Ecker, are you still in queue again or still in queue?
I wanted to make one clarifying question. So just so I understand the threat model a little more, the concern here is you used to have number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's been ported out, and we want to make sure you can no longer impersonate that number. That's what the whole point of this apparatus is to do, right?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, porting happens in such a threshold where I don't think there's that much of a risk of that particular attack.
Okay.
But like just that, if these were very long lived, that as number ranges changed hands, and that could be not just porting, but other kinds of acquisition or whatever, that we want to make sure that we have some way of, in real time, making sure that at least the CA, whatever the CA's, source of truth is, that it's compatible with their source of truth, that this person should be originating from.
I guess my question is how long is the reaction time like we're looking for here?
I mean, 24 hours is reasonable for porting.
Okay. Thanks. That helps think about it.
Can I just make this, Chris Wendt, just a quick comment there too? It also has benefits if there's a bad actor and you want to revoke them and like all the other things that so that's an important.
Yeah, because we do have revocation, and yeah, you'd love this one, Ecker. I mean, the way this works in Shaken is basically there's like a master CRL that is maintained by the PA, by this like policy administrator that governs the CAs, and every CA reports up to the PA about compromised certs, and it has a master list that gets pushed down to every verification service. It's more or less how that works. Okay, but this was all just me trying to explain what the existing option space for this is. So next slide.
Jonathan, are you left over in queue?
I think over the course of those questions, I think we probably covered just about all of this. Is there anything here that we haven't gone through? I think if we hadn't had that very lively discussion, there might be things here that I would have. I think this is fine. I guess I'll just say the last bullet. So what all of the confusion about this has led me to think so far. There have been various arguments. Oh, we should narrow it down of those 5 things, and maybe there are more we haven't thought of yet. We need to find one thing. And my argument so far has been that is premature. And like, because of the way that short-lived kind of works out of the box, and indeed AIA works out of the box for anything that's 8226 compliant, we kind of get those for free. And because we're doing so much OCSP already, like getting that extension to work, we also kind of get that for free. And so I'm reluctant to rule a lot of this out now. And we could end up with a pluralist environment for this ultimately, where there are people who want to do short-lived certs for their own reasons, like that are still compatible with the fact that of course OCSP is going to get used, right? And there may be some long-lived enterprises. New Star, my employer, has had 571, 434, 1000, 2000 for decades, right? There are number ranges like that nothing ever ports in and out of that are stable forever, where even like the AIA thing is probably fine. So premature. Next slide. Okay. So I want to talk just a little bit more about what I think, what we did for stapling. So what we proposed in the OCSP stapling draft, which is not yet adopted, it's not yet a working group item here, was that we would add a new staple element to the passport, and that is effectively where an OCSP staple would live. And I thought about doing it with the SIP header instead. And, I thought a lot about, should there be separate versions of the identity header that push certificates or push encrypted versions of passports? If we ever decided there were sensitive things in passports we wanted to encrypt, but I think I want to keep this at the passport layer, if for no other reason than to support out of band. And for some of the messaging cases, like we were talking about earlier, I think out of band is incredibly important. And we do a lot of it, as I said today. So I'm eager to have this be bound in with the passports. And, you could extend this idea to short-lived. You could effectively send either the leaf cert or the entire cert chain and embed it in the passport. And so all the information that you need to validate that passport without having to go back and talk to the CA at all is in there. Passport would be real big, much bigger than any passports we're pushing around today. And of course, we see people on the list complaining about MTUs and arguments we've been having here for decades around all that. But that's kind of how I interpreted ultimately what Jack was pushing for when he was talking about stapling for this, is that short-lived cert is synthesized on the spot for this call. We take it, we stick it, and either the X5C or the entire chain with it, we package it into a an element that's going to appear in the passport, and we ship the whole thing. Any thoughts about that? I think next slide just says like discussion probably. Yeah, so I mean, that's the only new thing on the menu. So we previously only had like 4 things on the menu. Now we got 5. That's the only new thing on the menu here. Any thoughts about that idea of doing this with short-lived, where we just package the entire cert and or cert chain in the passport itself? Is anybody here have an implementation, for example, of STIR? And I don't know how many people here do, though, that would barf on that. It's the SIP that'll barf, yeah.
So
There's a lot of UDPs still out there, man.
Yeah, I know.
This is Ben Campbell. I was just going to address a lot of UDP still out there, and I've even seen major carriers talk about how they have IP interconnects that they still can't do STIR over or shaken over because they're UDP.
Yeah.
But we already can't do any of this over UDP.
Well, Shaken should have adopted compact form some time ago, Mr. Wendt. I'm looking at you. That would have simplified all that, but yes.
So then you're just shoving information over back into the SIP header still.
No, compact form just basically dispenses with, everything but the SIG. That's actually, so the first 2 dots in that jot are just gone, and all you're left with is a SIG element.
I guess where I was going with that is that if we've already pushed us into using TCP.
Oh, fair enough.
Then what difference is a little more?
For this, you would then have to have a SIP header that would carry, the entire leaf certificate and the X5C with it. But Chris, thoughts?
Yeah, I can't get into queue for some reason. Chris Wendt. you know, we've been debating this for so long. I think I like it because of the property of not having to do more round trips.
You like what?
The proposal to package everything, whether it's stapling, either sense of stapling,
Okay.
including the certificate, or OCSP stapling. I think eventually it'd be good to maybe pick one, but if we have to keep both, that's fine. But you know, that's where my mind is at. I like your proposal.
Okay. Well, I haven't made my proposal yet. It's on the next slide,
I'm
but you
sorry.
know what it is
I know what
already.
it is.
Yes.
Spoilers.
He got the preview. You got the advanced screening that we held. It's very exclusive at South by a couple weeks ago. Next slide, please. Sorry. Yeah. So my next steps, if this was not overcome by the events in our discussion. So here's my proposal. I still want to let these flowers bloom. Not 1,000 of them, but I think 3 of them. And here's the 3 flowers I would like to let bloom. Let's take that OCSP baseline spec, which is already working group item. It's close to done. I have heard rumor there are other SDOs that have begun incorporating this into their stuff. So let's please get an RFC number. And published. Yes, I'm aware. Let's get an RFC number on that, please, just so that is something that people can, you know, rely on in the way that they should rely on IETF RFCs. But I'd also propose that we adopt in advance my currently expired short-lived draft. I was really hoping Jack was here because I've been trying to twist his arm into actually doing work on it since he's so hot on this solution, and I really shouldn't have to write like all these myself. But like, you know, I think that that's a no-brainer. Probably we will downplay the Acme dimension of it as previously discussed. We were looking at integration with Acme Star for this. And I think at this point it's become clear that the way that people are getting short-lived certificates from their service providers is just a different interface. And like, so I'm not gonna have this share fate with like the Acme Star stuff. And then take my existing stapling draft that I wrote for OCSP, and my proposal is let's genericize that a bit and have like think about it more like we're going to have a freshness element that we're going to add to the passport that can work for either this OCSP approach or for the short-lived, let's like just spam these certs themselves to the relying parties. That is my proposal. What do people think?
What's not in this? All these are?
He dropped one.
Well, so I didn't really drop anything. That's this. Yes, this is just, so the third is just taking the last 2 things and combining them. And like the 5th one, the very first one, we already specified in 8226, so that hasn't been dropped either. So basically I am here letting flowers bloom, but from a workflow perspective of the working group, my proposal is let's advance OCSP and short-lived. I think they both have applicability. I don't think we're in a position to pick a winner. And like, I'm not even sure that they're like competing in some areas. Like I can imagine cases where you could be using short-lived and like OCSP would still be involved. Ecker.
This seems in the finest traditions of the IETF. For us to,
I would also comment again, and this is very true of the STIR work overall. We provide some tools. Those tools are used in very different ways in different environments. And there are different profiles of this at a national level or for even mobile versus terrestrial that like, you know, where people are going to profile this in different ways. And my intuition is we should just make the tools available and like let those people have access to them.
I mean, I will say it's not, I have to think about it more, but it's not entirely clear to me why you need OCSP for doing short-lived certificate stapling. These are always kind of been like, you know, in the existing like web PKI, there are good reasons for this. Well, there are reasons at least. They're not good due to the install base, but it's not clear to me why we have to do both here because they're kind of isomorphic. But there may be some reason why you have to that I don't quite understand.
I mean, they are. I mean, this is one of those problems. It's because they're basically isomorphic. It's so hard to decide between them, right?
I mean, typically you'd imagine short-lived is actually a better approach because they're smaller, right? Because you don't have to have 2 SIGs, right?
Yeah,
But we can chat about it.
but those X5C chains could be quite large in delegation is another thing to bear in mind. So it's not just like single level. I mean, these could be like 5, 6 level delegations.
You're saying each one of those.
Yeah, well, and you got to do the certificate path validation then as relying party and like, I mean, so my intuition is there's no free lunch,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And that we basically end up doing the same work, like any way we look
it
at
could
this.
possibly be true.
All right, Jonathan Rosenberg. So again, in the grand tradition of the IETF of not picking a winner, just putting it all in there, is one of these mandatory to implement? All of them are mandatory to implement. It's literally a question. I don't. What are you intending?
My intention is that these are independent specifications and that compliant implementations of them will list the RFC with which they're compliant, and that there is no hitchhiker's guide that says this is what's mandatory and this is what's not yet. But once we get enough operational experience with this, and we're looking at more broadly, how do we tell people the story of STIR succinctly when things have gotten complicated enough with all our drafts that we need to, that would make the call. I just don't think we're in a position to make it yet.
I'm just trying to figure out, is there an interoperability problem where, or are you saying, oh, well, Addis is going to just solve it because they're going to pick one, so in practice there won't be an interoperability problem?
Well, but they'll pick one, and then the MAN system in France will pick one, and then ABR Telecom in Brazil will pick one.
Yeah, they won't be the same, so
It might not be.
we're going to strip these at national boundaries, or maybe we're already doing that.
It's too much digital sovereignty. They're all going to do it. Yeah.
All right. What about that
Let that be
end-to-end
stricken
principle?
from the record. Strike from the minutes my comments.
I remember that we used to
digital
talk about that. Remember that?
sovereignty. Yeah.
So the minutes will show that you're striking from the minutes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Chris, when
The transcript will.
I'm gonna pile on and say we should pick one. I'm not concerned about long certificate chains, unless you can think of and point to me a specific use case for that. But I think we should go for the short-lived with the quote staple. I would understand that, just to clarify what I agreed with, because I thought it was just the quote staple and the staple options. I'd be okay with that compromise, but my preference is the quote staple.
I mean,
it's the
I think it is
the simplest one. It's straightforward.
It is the most. I mean, yeah. I will say this. I will go on record. I think it, from a security perspective, it is the strongest solution. I do. Like, I mean, I think that provides the data minimization we want. It provides, like, as an assurance that feels stronger to me than OCSP for reasons likely we could go into. But at the same time, operationalizing that system where on a per call basis, you are synthesizing a certificate for a single telephone number and providing its chain, furnishing that and getting it into a passport in time. And then the certificate path validation is performed, which could potentially be a complex one, right? Like, especially if you're dealing with a PA that has trust relationships with other countries, and like there are potentially multiple paths that could be built, like to get to the trust anchor that you trust. Like, again, there's just no free lunch, man. I mean, every way I look at this, I get worried about where complexity could lurk in this architecture.
Yeah, but those are all pre-call things, right? I mean,
no. This literally needs to be done. Okay, I'll put it this way. You could have
you can
have an AS
gather that information
would,
pre-call is what I mean.
That would build a short-lived cert for every number that AS could possibly sign for. But then the question becomes, how short-lived are those? How often do you have to do that process again? Is it 5 minutes? Where if I have 500,000 telephone numbers it's possible for me to originate calls from, I'm going to go and get 500,000 certs synthesized for that, and like have those all available to me at the AS. The key ring that's going to manage that at the AS, and it's going to say on a per call basis, okay, this is the cert. I mean, just don't underestimate my point. What the complexity of that could be.
Right.
Because my AS does not work that way. My AS does not have 500,000 certs.
But you're gathering those things asynchronously. It's not that you're doing it all at the call.
I mean, I would probably do it at the call if I built this, to be honest. Well, I mean, it depends on.
It doesn't change that.
If there's only
often,
100
that's the-
numbers I have to worry about, I might not do it, on a, as I receive the, API call to my AAS. But, if I have to do this for a large number of enterprises with tens of millions of these things that I'm signing, for as an AAS, and there are CPaaS providers that we sign for that have a lot of telephone numbers, right? And if it's my job to keep an inventory of that and a key ring for, tens, hundreds of millions of these telephone numbers, don't underestimate the complexity of this.
5-minute warning.
Yeah, managing millions of numbers is complex. Yeah.
I mean, this is different than I think a function that existed in the past. I'm not saying it's impossible, but and maybe Ecker has a very elegant way to do this better.
Probably not. But I mean, as you say, you either have them in advance or you get them on the fly. It's kind of like, can we make it so you don't have like 500,000 signatures? Probably, but can we make it so you don't have to store some stuff? Probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, but I can sell you some Merkle tree story or something like that.
Yeah, I'm much more worried about 500 million than 500,000.
Yeah. I'm sorry. We can probably sell you some story. We don't actually have to have like 500 million private keys or something like that. But you have to manage some data, right? There's no way around it.
Yeah, there's no free lunch.
Yeah. So we should try. I mean, probably worth trying to play with some design, see what the constraint space is.
Yep. Because otherwise, I don't got an answer. Like I said, I don't know what to do here other than be let's advance 3 documents that have keep working on this, advance 3 documents that have roughly this scope to them, and see if we can do better.
So as chair, what are the concrete working group actions we're looking at here? Are we talking about working group last calling OCSP or not?
Yeah,
is it ready?
I don't know.
You said it's close to done.
Yeah. I mean, I might take one more spin on that before we working with last call out.
And then call for adoption on
call for adopt on short-lived immediately. Yes, because people clearly want to do short-lived. This has been lurking as a draft Peterson forever. Let's get that in IETF in front of it.
And then on the generalized stapling, that's just something you're working on, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I've literally occurred to me to do that this morning.
Okay.
So. Let me do at least one rev of that before we talk about adoption.
When do the SDOs that are doing that incorporating need an RFC number?
Well,
3 months ago.
3 months ago. Same as for RCD. You know how long ago RCD was put into specifications before we'd had
and we moved it out from under them too.
But this isn't who we want to be, Russ, right? We want to be better.
I got it.
Okay, I think we took those actions. We'll have to discuss them on the list because there's clearly disagreement in the room.
Well, there's been some good discussion on the list about this already. Again, that was precipitated by Jack's mail. And so, yes, we need some more discussion around that. With that, am I off the hook?
Yep. 3 minutes left here. Is there any other business?
AOB.
Thank you, John.
Hearing none?
And thank you, Simon, for note taking.
Yes. So thank you. See you in the plenary.
All right.